So, I was taking a walk the other day, and as I was walking, I stumbled on something on the ground, something of interest. So, I leaned over, and I picked it up, and it was a red pill. It was a red pill. And on the pill, it said, "Do not eat," in tiny letters. So, naturally, I ate it. And what happened next was strange. What happened next was I felt the power of 1,000 men coursing through my veins. And in that moment, I knew my life's calling. Complaining about women on the internet. Greetings, folks. Today we're talking about the red pill community. By that, I mean we're talking about men's rights activism, as well as the communities and ideologies that have sprung around men's rights activism and its ties to anti-feminism. This is a topic that has been covered in both positive and negative portrayals, but hasn't been covered very comprehensively in a sociology sense. I'd like to rectify that, so join me as we dust off our cliche idioms and see how deep that rabbit hole goes. First, I'll briefly talk about myself and my relation to the red pill community. I have no relation to the red pill community. Well, no direct relation. Growing up, I was raised by fairly socially conscious parents, and my mom was a self-proclaimed feminist. By 2012, I was a fairly feminism-friendly person, and by 2014, I consciously identified as a feminist. Since then, I've dipped back and forth between different branches of thought within feminism, but ultimately I've landed on believing in a few tenets of feminism. 1. Intersectionality. Intersectionality, of course, is the idea that rather than having social circumstances or systems be isolated singularities, they are instead complexly interwoven, intersecting structures that inform individual circumstances. To explain it in a simpler manner, things such as gender, race, class, sexual orientation, they don't exist independently of each other, but are instead linked in various ways. One of the best ways to demonstrate intersectionality is through the individual. As a white person, I will experience race differently than a black person. As a trans woman, I will experience gender differently than a man, but also differently than a cis woman. This thought can be applied to almost anything, but typically it's used in reference to systems of oppression in society. 2. Gender as a social system. I know this might disappoint some viewers, but I'm a social constructionist at heart, and I believe that gender is socially constructed from the ground up. The gendering of people as male or female, or consequently as men and women, in Western society is a social process through which we come to internalize a masculine or feminine identity. This process is one that I believe requires continuous reproduction in order to continuously be the case. We are not born men or women. Male and female are not the only possible gender identities, and the only reason why we've experienced such a binary is because the gender binary is imposed onto people from day one, by which we socially disallow the construction of other gender identities. 3. The opposition and dismantling of patriarchy. Patriarchy is a structure in our society by which men come to be privileged over women and by extension come to hold a majority of the power in our society. It's worth noting that patriarchy isn't a legal structure, it's a cultural structure. Patriarchy is a mentality that we teach and that we learn and that we perpetuate through our culture. And this extends into our laws and into our media and into our homes. But it doesn't actually have a specific point of origin, it's more a continuously reproduced mindset. As such, we can undo that mindset, and removing patriarchal norms from our culture will by nature remove them from our society. This is a key component of giving women equality. It's also worth noting that patriarchy is not the only cultural structure of this kind, and that by opposing patriarchy, feminists aren't trying to construct masculinity or men as the inherent perpetrators of oppression. Oppression is more nuanced. Social structures intersect, and as a result, while patriarchy is the term used to describe the specifics of gender-based oppression, patriarchy is not a term that is sufficient to describe all oppression. Patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, cisnormativity, heteronormativity, these are structures that are in place in my society in the United States, and these things affect each other and they contribute to the subjugation of women, the subjugation of people of color, the subjugation of the working class, the poor and the homeless, the subjugation of trans people, gay people, bi people, and so on. 4. Egalitarian efforts. It's worth noting that although I will probably criticize groups of men a number of times throughout this video, critique is not the same thing as condemnation, and my beliefs as a feminist are not centered around helping women alone, but helping people regardless of gender. I do believe there are many issues that men face that are specific to men. I believe that men experience oppression on other bases, such as black men experiencing racism and in particular anti-black racism, or gay men experiencing homophobia, or poor men experiencing class issues. These issues are important, and I don't wish to be intellectually dishonest and ignore other axes along which men can experience hardship and oppression. It's also worth noting that I believe patriarchy as a cultural mindset is one that both privileges and harms men. And while I will often point out the privileges that men have because I think they're important to understanding gender-based social problems, I also will often point out the ways in which men are harmed by patriarchy. And so I will be fair and try to point out issues that harm men whenever I can. And yes, that does sometimes include white men and straight men and cis men. With that out of the way, let's discuss the red pill community. So first we have to discuss, what is the red pill community? Well, it's really a catch-all term for 4 or 5 different groups that all believe in a few common ideas. Among those groups are men's rights activists, pickup artists, anti-feminists, and male separatists, or as they call themselves, men going their own way, or MGTOW for short. So what makes a lot of people from these various groups part of the red pill community? Well, it's really one major feature, which is centered around the idea of taking the red pill. So then what is the red pill? Well, it's an idiom that has been used to describe people, mostly men, recognizing and coming to terms with the suggested reality that women actually have more of the power in society, and they use this power to oppress men. So quite literally, feminism in reverse. It's probably well-tread ground by now, but it bears repeating. The idiom taking the red pill comes from the film The Matrix, in which the main character, Neo, discovers that he's been living inside of a simulated reality his whole life. This discovery is revealed after he's offered a red and blue pill and told that the red pill will awaken him to a deeper truth that he wasn't aware of, while the blue pill will allow him to forget about all of this and go back to living his life ignorant of the deeper truth. He takes the red pill, wakes up in a dystopian nightmare universe, and has to come to terms with realizing his whole life had been a lie. It's also worth repeating, like many before me, that the film was written and directed by 2 trans men, and a lot of people have used this as a jumping off point for a very trans feminist reading of the film, with the pills representing hormone replacement therapy, the matrix representing cisnormativity, and the act of taking the red pill representing discovering that you're trans. Even by using this idiom to describe their ideology, the red pill community showcases themselves being rather incoherent, and that's a bit of a theme when it comes to the community as a whole. Because the community is composed of several smaller groups, each with their own little differences in perspective. The film The Red Pill, which I'll discuss in a later video in this series, classifies these groups into 3 categories: MRAs, red pills, and MGTOWs. MRAs want equality within the system, red pills want to take advantage of the system, and MGTOWs want to leave the system. What underlies all of these groups is one major ideological commonality: the idea that, contrary to feminist thought, men are actually the oppressed group of the world, and specifically in the West, and that men are at a disadvantage in the system compared to women. The phrase red pill specifically refers, in their culture, to coming to the realization that the system is designed to benefit women at the expense of men. It's entirely antithetical to patriarchy arguments that feminists put forth. I've looked at a number of red pill websites and articles covering the red pill community, as well as watched the Red Pill movie, and checked out some prominent YouTubers who discuss red pill ideology. And through all of these, I've caught onto a few common trends. So let me try to construct what the commonalities are in terms of ideology. 1. Anti-feminism. This is one of the first and foremost tenets of red pill philosophy. Feminism is wrong. Women either already have equality or have it better than men, and typically, feminism is portrayed as a method of oppressing men or creating more of an advantage for women over men. And at its most extreme, feminism is portrayed as a conspiracy theory against men, and this is where the red pill idiom becomes most prominent, believing that the entire system is feminist in nature and that they are opposing the grand feminist conspiracy. It's worth noting that not all in the red pill community reach this extreme, but as I've seen time and time again, many do. 2. Male oppression. Red pillars believe that men are oppressed, and that this oppression is not inherently tied to race or class or sexuality, and happens more specifically to straight white men. A lot of red pillars will act hostile to anyone who tries to portray being a straight white man as a privileged position and believes in concepts like female privilege. 3. Biological essentialism. Red pillars seem to largely believe that biology dictates your gender and sexuality, and that masculinity and femininity are inherently tied to biology in such a way that makes gender norms hardwired to us in some sort of biological manner. One example I found from a red pillar is the idea that women have a biological compulsion towards becoming mothers, that this somehow explains women's drive towards being more sexually attractive. 4. Evolutionary psychology. Somewhat of an extension of biological essentialism, red pillars believe in evolutionary psychology, and they believe that the current circumstances in which women have supposed advantages over men are a result of evolutionary psychology. Often, evopsych claims begin with hunter-gatherer society, and red pillars will argue that it was men's evolutionary advantage to seek status and power, while women's evolutionary advantage was to seek beauty and, well, men. As a result, women use sexuality to gain advantage over men, while men are exploited for their status and power, so the red pill tale goes. 5. Women as manipulators. This is a central idea and probably the most toxic of the bunch. The red pill community seems to firmly believe that women are manipulating men either into sex, or into systemic advantages, or into children, or something of that sort. Regardless, red pillars portray women as deceptive and for purely selfish reasons, and this extends into why red pillars often believe in a feminist conspiracy. They believe that women are deceivers, and so they believe that feminism is a method through which they can maintain power and maintain the deception. After all, in order to take the red pill, there must first be a deceitful false reality that the world has convinced everyone to believe. And so in order to wake up to the realization that women have advantage over men, there must first be a false narrative in which women do not have advantage over men. Red pillars argue that women at large, or feminism in particular, help to maintain the blue-pilled world in this sense. 6. A hierarchy of masculinity. This is a strange topic because one of the weirder aspects of the red pill community is how they construct masculinity within their small community. Specifically, they construct hierarchies of masculinity based on typically binary notions of superior and inferior masculinity. Blue-pilled and red-pilled are the most obvious example, with blue-pilled referring to people, usually men, who have fallen for the feminist conspiracy, while red-pill refers to people, usually men, who have awoken to the reality of the feminist conspiracy. There's an implication that to be blue-pilled is to be a failure of masculinity, given how it's used in relation to the word cuck, another word in the ever-expanding glossary of the red pill community. Other examples of masculinity dichotomies are alpha and beta, words referring to men who are strong and have high status and have access to sex with women, and men who conversely don't have these things, and of all things, involuntarily celibate or incel and chad, words referring to whether or not these men can, again, access sex with women. One thing worth noting is that to achieve the superior masculinity status to this community, it appears that you have to be a member of this community. You can't be a real man, after all, if you aren't red-pilled. Even within the community, they still construct a hierarchy where you want to avoid becoming a beta or a cuck or a mangina. What I find fascinating about this is that they use these tiny hierarchies of masculinity to both police people within their community, as well as to frame outsiders to the community as inherently inferior, and thus discourage anyone from leaving the community. Now, let's be clear here. This is just an overview. There's a lot of room for variation among different people within their community. These tenets showcase similarities among them, but they don't showcase the fine details that make the community what it is. We'll cover their ideas in a lot more detail in a minute, but first we have to ask an important question. Does their core ideology hold up? And to that, I answer loudly, no! I try to avoid poisoning the well, but it's been suggested by people before me, including some of the sources I've pulled from for this video, that the Red Pill community are a cult. And while I'm hesitant to go that far, I do think that the community mimics a lot of the makings of a cult. In particular, the way in which they try to create distrust of people who don't believe in their ideology, and their framing as being the tiny, truly enlightened group that understands the world while everyone else is blinded. They also found themselves on an actual conspiracy theory. There is no evidence to suggest that women hold power over men in society, or to suggest that feminism holds systemic power. It's worth noting that if I do bring facts into these conversations, Red Pillers will say that the facts are wrong. And if I mention that I pulled these from academic sources, they'll claim that academia is conspiring to manipulate people into feminism. Even if I make a video thoroughly debunking their ideology, they'll still find some way to dismiss my points or perspective, or even try to prevent me from having a chance to be heard at all. Regardless of if they respond to this video in that way or not, I want to offer a counterpoint so that people who are critical of my perspective will at least think about where they're getting these feelings from. If an idea is true, if it's good, if it checks out and can hold up to the weight of criticism, then we shouldn't fear letting criticism of that idea happen. If the Red Pill ideology is supposed to be right, then it should be perfectly okay for me to criticize it, because all that'll mean is that I'll be wrong. And if I'm wrong, then this can be demonstrated in an intellectually honest and civil way. I've already covered the volumes of harassment I've received online in a previous video, so given the overlap between my harassers' beliefs and those of the Red Pill community, I don't expect that I'll get as positive of results as I'd hoped to, but you never know. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and address the, let's say, flaws in the Red Pill beliefs. In the next 4 videos in this series, I'm going to categorize Red Pill statements into one of 4 categories and debunk their various claims accordingly. 1. Anti-feminism, meaning anything that discusses opposition to feminism and beliefs of male oppression or female superiority in society. 2. Biological or evolutionary essence. This is lumping both biological essentialism and evolutionary psychology together, and refers to any statement that appeals to some sort of fundamental biological or evolutionary force that influences our thoughts and behaviors, especially as they relate to gender norms. 3. Women as manipulators, meaning anything that portrays women as having control of or power over men in such a way that they manipulate men for their own gain. 4. Hierarchy of masculinity, meaning anything in which they construct certain men as inherently inferior to other men, or conversely, constructing certain men as inherently superior to other men. Before we begin this series in full, I'd like to make some acknowledgements. I would like to thank first and foremost my sociology professor for helping me gather citations for this project, which helps to make sure that I'm not just pulling everything I say out of my ass, and for just being a really helpful professor and a great person all around. I'd like to thank Nick Spheres for helping me gradually figure out the technical side of things so that my videos don't look like complete crap, and in helping me with other stuff behind the scenes as well. I'd like to thank the members of my Discord for willingly sitting through the entire Red Pill documentary with me and helping me get through it for the sake of this series. And lastly, I'd like to thank my backers on Patreon, because y'all are the reason I'm able to produce content like this in the first place, and hopefully as I gain more viewers and potentially more backers, I'll be able to produce continuously better videos for the channel and make it worthwhile for you all. Thank you. Join me soon for some next level nitpicky bullshit.